My family manipulated me into buying them a $240K house. But when I discovered they stole $10K and moved my sister in without permission, I stopped paying the mortgage and the bank took everything away. I'm 28 years old. I work in software development, and I need to tell this story because for the last 3 years, I've been carrying around this guilt that, honestly, I don't even know if it's justified anymore or if I was just manipulated into feeling this way. What happened basically destroyed my relationship with my parents and my sister. And even though part of me feels terrible about how everything ended, another part, the part that's tired of being the responsible kid who always has to sacrifice everything, feels relieved. I guess I should start from the beginning, or at least from where things really started going to shit. I grew up in a pretty typical family, or so I thought. My dad, Christopher, always had trouble keeping a stable job. You know, he'd change employers every year or two, sometimes he'd get fired, sometimes he'd just quit because he didn't like the environment or the boss or whatever. My mom, Helen, worked part-time in an administrative office, but the salary was never enough. We were one of those families that was always tight on money, but not poor, you know what I mean? Like we had enough for the basics, but any extra expense was a whole drama. And then there was my younger sister Samantha, who's 25 now, but back then she would have been like 22 or 23. Samantha was always the favorite, and I'm not saying that with resentment. Well, maybe a little. But it was obvious. She dropped out of high school in her sophomore year because she said school wasn't for her, and my parents basically said, "That's fine, find your path." Whereas when I got a C in math in 8th grade, my dad grounded me for 3 weeks. I was always the responsible kid. I finished high school, worked part-time at a grocery store to help out at home, and when I turned 19, my parents told me they wanted me to study something in tech because that's where the future and the money was. At that point, we didn't have money for traditional college, so I enrolled in a technical coding school. One of those that promises you a job in 6 months if you work hard. My parents paid the tuition. Like $15,000 total, I think. They took it out from a loan and from the savings they had for emergencies. And my dad, Christopher, reminded me of it constantly. Not a month went by without him saying something like, "We sacrificed for you. We went into debt so you could have a future. I hope you appreciate it." And I did appreciate it. Seriously, I felt grateful and guilty at the same time. You know that feeling of debt that never quite gets paid off. After graduating, I got a decent job at a mid-sized company. Nothing spectacular, but I was making good money for being 22. I started living with 2 coworkers in an apartment. We split 3 ways, and even though it wasn't much, at least it was my space. For the first 2 years, I worked like crazy, did overtime, accepted any extra projects, and I kept saving. I paid off my school loan in a year and a half, sent money to my parents every month to help with bills, like $300 or $400, and I still managed to save. I had no social life. Basically, I didn't spend on anything that wasn't necessary. My roommates would go out on weekends and I'd stay in, watching coding tutorials or working on freelance projects to make extra money. By the time I turned 25, I had saved up like $80,000, which I know isn't a fortune, but for me it was everything. It was my safety net, my future, maybe a down payment on my own house someday or capital to start something. And then my parents started with the pressure. First it was subtle, casual comments about how expensive their apartment rent was, about how Christopher had lost another job, and things were tough. Then Helen started saying things like, "It would be so nice to have our own house before we're too old. You make good money, you could help us, right?" And at first I'd just send them more money. I increased from $400 to $600 a month, thinking that would help them, but it wasn't enough. One day, I think it was in March 3 years ago, my parents invited me to lunch at their apartment, and they basically ambushed me there. The 2 of them sat down across from me at the little dining table, and Christopher started with this long speech about everything they'd done for me, about the sacrifice of paying for my education, about how now that I had a good job and saved money, it was my turn to give back. And Helen was crying, like literally crying, saying they were tired of living in rental apartments, that they wanted something of their own, something they could leave to their kids someday. And I felt horrible, you know? Because they were right in a way. They had paid for my school, and I was making good money. And maybe it was selfish of me to have all that money saved while they were still struggling. They asked me to buy them a house, or at least put down the down payment and help with the mortgage. But the thing is, I knew it was a bad idea. Deep down, I knew it. But guilt is a powerful tool, you know what I mean? I spent the next 2 weeks not sleeping well, turning it over in my head. Was I a bad son for refusing? Was I being selfish, wanting to keep my money? Every time I talked to my mom, she'd slip in some comment about how hard everything was, and my dad would mention that a friend of his had just bought his parents a house, and what a wonderful son he was. It was a total manipulation campaign. Looking back, I see it crystal clear. But at that moment, I just felt like a garbage person. So I gave in. I told them yes, that I'd help them buy a house. We found one in a decent suburban area. Nothing fancy, but it was a 3-bedroom house with a small yard, nice for what it cost. The price was about $240,000. I put down $60,000 from my savings, and I took out the mortgage in my name because my dad didn't qualify because of his unstable work history. The monthly payment was like $1,400 plus taxes and insurance. It ended up being almost $1,800 a month. I made good money, but not that much. After that mortgage and paying my share of rent for the apartment where I lived, I was left pretty tight for everything else. I completely stopped saving, stopped doing freelance projects because I didn't have the energy anymore. Basically, my life became working to pay for a house where I didn't live and a room in a shared apartment. At first, everything seemed fine. My parents moved into the house and they were happy. They'd send me pictures of how they were decorating each room. Helen planted flowers in the yard. Christopher painted the garage. I felt good, like maybe I had done the right thing after all. Maybe this is what being a good son meant. My sister Samantha was still living with a friend at that point. She worked occasionally at temp jobs but never lasted more than 2 or 3 months anywhere. Sometimes she'd go weeks without working, and my parents would pay her share of rent, which always seemed unfair to me, but whatever. I was already used to that differential treatment. But around 6 months in, I started noticing weird things. When I'd visit the house, Samantha was there. Always. She had her clothes in one of the bedrooms, her stuff in the bathroom, her dishes in the kitchen. When I asked my mom if Samantha had moved in, she said, no, she's just staying a few days because she had problems with her roommate. But those days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. By the first year, Samantha was living there full-time, wasn't paying anything because she still had no stable job, and my parents acted like it was the most normal thing in the world. I tried to talk about it, but my mother always had an excuse. She's your sister. She needs support. She's going through a hard time. And what about me? I was living with 2 roommates in an apartment where we shared 1 bathroom, working 50 hours a week to pay for a house where my unemployed sister lived for free. But I didn't say anything more, because I didn't want to be the selfish, bitter brother. Then came the real blow. It was like a year and a half ago, in October if my memory serves me right. I went to visit the house on a Saturday afternoon without warning, something I rarely did because I was always working, and the house was empty. I thought they'd gone out, but when I called my mom, she told me very casually, "Oh yeah, we moved 2 weeks ago. Didn't I tell you?" And I was like, "What? What do you mean you moved?" It was my house. I mean, the mortgage was in my name. I was paying for it. She explained that they'd decided to move to a rental apartment closer to my dad's new job. Yeah, another new job. I'd already lost count of how many he'd had, and that the house was now for Samantha. Just like that. Like it was nothing. They didn't even consult me, didn't ask my opinion. They just made the decision and informed me after. I was furious, like a fury I'd never felt before. I told them it wasn't fair, that I was paying for the house, that they couldn't just give it to Samantha who wasn't even paying anything. And that's when the manipulation started again. Helen told me I was being selfish, that Samantha needed stability, that she was looking for work, and having a house would give her the peace of mind necessary to find something good. Christopher reminded me that they'd paid for my school, that without them I wouldn't have the job I have, that I owed them this. And Samantha, when I finally talked to her, told me that I'd always been the academic favorite, that they'd supported me with my education, and they never gave her the same opportunities. So I should stop being jealous and selfish. I tried to reason with them. I proposed that at least Samantha pay something, even if it was $500 a month, whatever, to help with the mortgage. My parents said they'd ask her, but that I shouldn't pressure her because she was going through a hard time. Spoiler: she was always going through a hard time. Obviously, Samantha said she couldn't pay anything because she had no job, and the cycle continued. During those months, I kept paying the full mortgage, every damn month, $1,800, so my sister could live for free in a 3-bedroom house while I was still in my shared room. But then I discovered something that completely broke me. I'd been sending $2,000 extra every 3 or 4 months, thinking that money would go directly to paying down the principal mortgage to reduce the balance and finish the debt faster. I always sent that extra money to my mother, and she'd tell me she applied it to the mortgage loan. One day, I decided to check my mortgage account online, something you should have done from the beginning, but honestly, it gave me anxiety to see those numbers, and I realized those extra payments had never been applied. The house balance was still pretty much the same as at the start, minus the normal monthly payments. I sent them a message demanding an ASAPDO explanation. And after a lot of dodging the subject, my dad finally admitted that extra money had been used to help with the down payment for the apartment they were renting and for other expenses. Basically, they'd taken like $8,000 that I thought were going toward the mortgage and used it for their stuff. Something broke in me right there. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like all the fog of guilt and family obligation cleared suddenly, and I could see the situation clearly for the first time. My parents were using me. It wasn't family love or reciprocity or anything noble. It was pure convenience. I was the ATM son, the one who worked and paid while they made decisions without consulting me and gave everything to Samantha on a silver platter. And the worst part is, they'd made me feel like I was the selfish one, that I was the problem for not wanting to sacrifice more. I made a decision that I know many will think was drastic or immature, but honestly, it was the first time in years. I made a decision thinking about myself and not about them. I sent them a long text message, basically telling them everything I've been telling you here. How I felt used and betrayed, how they'd lied about the extra money, how it was unfair that Samantha lived for free in a house I was paying for. I gave them 2 options. Either Samantha started paying at least $800 a month to cover part of the mortgage, or I'd stop paying completely. I gave them 2 weeks to decide. The response was predictable. Helen cried and told me I was destroying the family. How could I be so cruel to my own sister? Christopher threatened me, saying, if I stopped paying, I'd ruin my credit and regret it my whole life. Samantha sent me a series of insulting messages, telling me I was a bitter, resentful person, that I'd always been the perfect son, and now I was showing my true colors. None of them accepted the conditions. Samantha said she'd look for work but didn't send me a single penny. My parents kept going with their speech about family obligation and sacrifice, so I kept my word. I stopped paying the mortgage. Completely. Not one more dollar. The first 2 months the bank sent late payment notices. Then the calls started. Then the certified letters saying they'd initiate foreclosure proceedings if I didn't catch up. I ignored everything. I blocked the bank's number, threw away the letters without opening them. My parents called me desperately, but I'd already blocked them too. I only talked to them one more time, like in the 3rd month of not paying, and I told them this was the consequence of their decisions, that they chose to give the house to Samantha without my consent and steal my money, so now they could deal with the result. My mother was crying, telling me Samantha had nowhere to go, and I responded that maybe she should have thought about that before moving her in there without consulting me. The foreclosure process took like 8 months total. During that time, my credit obviously went to shit, dropped like 200 points, but honestly, I cared less than I thought I would. I wasn't planning to buy anything big in the next few years anyway. Samantha kept living in the house, because technically until the bank sold it, she could be there, and my parents stayed in their rental apartment. During those months, they tried to contact me everywhere. Messages from distant relatives saying I should reconsider. Even an uncle I never saw called to tell me I was being too harsh. But I'd already made my decision, and even though I felt guilty, I also felt free for the first time in years. Finally, the bank sold the house at auction. They bought it for like $200,000 or something. Samantha had to move out. Obviously, I think she went with a friend again or maybe with my parents. Honestly, I don't know and I don't care. My parents had to move to a cheaper apartment because without my monthly financial help, they couldn't afford the one they had. And me, well, I finally left the shared apartment and rented my own place. A small studio, but it's mine. I pay for it with my money and nobody makes me feel guilty about it. It's cheaper than what I was paying in mortgage, so for the first time in 3 years, I'm able to save again. I'm not going to lie and say everything's perfect now. My family basically doesn't talk to me. They've made me the villain of the story, and I'm sure at family gatherings, which I'm no longer invited to, they tell a version where I'm the ungrateful son who abandoned his family. There are days when I feel bad, like did I really do the right thing? Was I too extreme? But then I remember everything, the manipulation, the lies about the money, how they used me for years without any consideration, and the guilt fades. I don't wish them ill, seriously, but I also don't want to have that type of relationship again where I exist only to be financially exploited. I've been in therapy the last 6 months, something I should have done years ago, and my therapist helped me understand that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. That saying no to your family when they're hurting you doesn't make you a bad son, it makes you an adult with self-respect. I'm still working on that, honestly, because guilt and family programming don't erase overnight. But I'm better. Definitely better than when I was paying for a house where I didn't live, for people who didn't appreciate my sacrifice. Last week, I saw that Samantha posted something on social media about living your best life and not letting toxic people hold you back, and I almost laughed. The irony is brutal. I guess in her version of the story, I'm the toxic person, not the parents who got her used to not working or paying for anything, or herself for feeling entitled to live for free while others broke their backs. But, whatever. Everyone has their narrative. The only thing I know for certain is that I wouldn't do something like this again. I wouldn't sacrifice my future and my stability for people who wouldn't do the same for me. And even though I lost a house and my relationship with my family, I gained something more important. I gained my independence, my peace of mind, and the ability to look at myself in the mirror without feeling like I'm betraying someone, especially myself. And that, I guess, is worth more than any house or family approval.